One of the greatest challenges people face today is they're not seeing growth even after working for many years. Not because they lack talent, but because they lack clarity. To go further deeper, one of the greatest challenges anyone has is they start thinking like an employee. Most of us think like an employee. The moment you start thinking like an employer, the whole paradigm shift happens. Right? What happens when we are employees? We think like an employee. We talk about roles, responsibilities, tasks, being fair. Right? This is very common word we hear from any employee for that matter. But the moment you start thinking like an employer, the whole paradigm shift happens. You think about trust, you think about value, you think about ownership. You start developing skills which are required for the company. You think about long-term impact. So a lot of things starts changing, right? The paradigm shift happens in you the moment you start thinking like an employer. My webinar is about that shift, that major shift which is going to happen in you. And I am going to cover this in detail. There are several aspects which go through a great transformation just by thinking like an employer, which we are going to deep dive into this subject. Uh, to go a little further, I am talking about how you judge under pressure, right? Everybody does a fantastic job. Everything is when everything is going well. But when there are challenges, when you face some challenge, how you are going to handle that. We are going to talk about techniques. This webinar is not about information. This webinar is all about transformation. We are going to talk about case studies, simulations, which can help you to build that skills. And going little further, like, and see, when you talk about communication is a very important aspect. We are not talking about everyday communication, how you write email, how you interact with your team members. We are talking about decision-oriented communication. When you talk, you should talk about your credibility, your strengths, your maturity, your confidence. There are a lot of techniques which we can learn. By that, people see you as something, as a people see you as a leader. Another very, very important and most critical aspect is predictability and reliability. Imagine today you are promoted to next level. Does the employer think that the company think whether you are capable of handling at that level, whether that reliability is there, predictability is there? Once you develop that, the probability of getting promotion is much, much, much higher, I would say, because it should be predictable, it should be reliable. Without that, you cannot expect to grow in an organization. That predictability and reliability comes from variety of things. It is not about one-time activity. There are very, very simple activities which you can do every day. It looks simple, but over a long time, over a long term, it builds credibility, it builds trust, and the employer will start seeing you at next level already, right? And predictability and reliability. This is something which happens every day, and we will talk at length about this, how you can build this. And another very interesting aspect in any organization is the sense of ownership, right? So you are given task one, two, three, four, five, you just go and you perform, you come back. But the sense of ownership is not there. How do you build that, right? That is very, very interesting. It's not only important for employer, it is also important for employee also. Because when you start doing with ownership, right, you do with pride, you do with involvement, you put your all your efforts, and when you see the outcome, you feel happy about it, right? And being joyous is also very important. It's not about cribbing and doing things, right? It's about doing joyfully. So again, I'm coming back to ownership of outcomes. So if you develop that quality of I am responsible for this task, right? You will do whatever it takes to make sure the task is completed. See, we are hired to solve some problem, right? If we go back to our manager every time with some problem, then there is no point in hiring us, right? They expect maturity, they expect some sort of responsibility, some sort of decision making capability. This is very, very interesting, and we will talk about this in detail in our webinar. And so, when we talk about again stakeholder, we will talk about stakeholder management. What is a stakeholder? Stakeholder is to whom you are accountable, to whom you are responsible. If you don't know who is your stakeholder, you will not be able to do a good job. So, it is very important to understand all your stakeholders. It can be a client, it can be an employee, it can be an outside person, it can be an outside organization. If you know all your stakeholders and what are their expectations, then your job becomes much, much easier. There is something called KPA, you might have heard, Key Performance Indicator, which means end of the year, how you are going to be measured. When you communicate with manager, you should be able to talk in the language, right? You should be able to ask him how am I measured by end of the year. So the key KPA I'm talking about. So if you know that well in advance, then your preparation will be much better, and you will be able to talk about yourself. Another very interesting aspect which I'm going to cover in my webinar is delegation, the skill of delegation. A lot of people think that if I keep doing same thing and I'm doing my job efficiently, but why am I not getting promoted? That will not work that way. See, whatever you are doing today, if you are doing after 1 year same thing, right, then you cannot expect different result. If you want a different result, it is very important that you take up new skill, right, new responsibilities. How do you do that effectively? One of the most effective way of doing that is you delegate your task. Delegation is not about just giving tasks. There are several different dimensions of delegation. How you delegate, when you delegate. There is a process involved in that, which I'm going to cover in detail in my webinar. And there are other aspects like leadership skills I'm talking about. So one of the skills is emotional intelligence, right? Sometimes escalation happens. There is a conflict between two team members. How you are going to manage that? Imagine tomorrow you are manager, you are appointed as a manager, you are promoted as a manager. There is a conflict between person A and person B. How you are going to manage that? It all starts with self-awareness and how you act under pressure, right? A deadline. This circumstances talk so much about you, and we are going to talk about a lot of practical things which can help you to improve your emotional intelligence. And there is another very powerful thing which we are going to cover in the webinar. It's about mindful presence, right? The quality of whatever you do will increase multifold just by being mindful. Just by being mindful. See what you can do in 4 hours. If you are able to do it in 2 hours, then you have another 2 hours for your learning, for your development, for your reflection. So people think that we are paid for our time. We spend 8 hours or 10 hours in a job, and we are paid for our time. But the reality is different. We are not just paid for time, we are paid for attention, the quality of attention. Imagine you write a very fantastic, big, very big email, but there are some small errors on numbers, right? If that attention is not there, it's not about volume, right? If the attention is not there, we end up making some small, silly mistakes. And this can impact your reputation, your goodwill, and your probability of moving to next level. You might have done 100 good things, but one small mistake can ruin your career. So what I'm going to do in my upcoming webinar is we are going to talk about several practical aspects, how you can bring in that mindfulness in your work. Very simple activities. It may take few seconds, few minutes. For example, imagine you had a tough conversation with somebody, and next minute you have an important meeting with your manager. How you are going to manage yourself? There are several techniques which we can deep dive into it, and this can be a game changer for you, right? And another very critical aspect is outcome based visibility. You have to create visibility for yourself which are outcome based, right? And this happens not just one day. It happens how you present yourself, how you delegate, how you communicate, how you show up in the meeting. Believe it or not, every moment of our life, we are building brand about ourselves. I'm talking about personal branding. So there is a brand we carry. All of us carry brand, and that comes not from one day activity or one time activity. It all depends upon whatever we do every day. How we do small things is how you do a big thing. And it can be a small activity, but how you do it with joyfulness, how you do it responsibility, with care, and you should enjoy what you do, right? And so people can sense that. And these are something which I am going to talk deeper in my webinar. These are only small tidbits, but we are going to much deeper aspects of what makes you ready for next level. The moment you are ready for next level, you don't have to do anything. Automatically, things starts happening. And I am going to give you some practical insights, very deeper insights, irrespective of whichever organization you work for. It can be a small organization or a mid-level organization or a very large organization. It does not matter which company you work or which industry you work. There are something which are common across industries. And these qualities are not just one-time affair. The moment you start working on these qualities, it is going to help you for a lifetime to become a professional and people see you differently. What I am requesting you is just register for the webinar and let us go deep dive into several aspects. I am talking from my 35 years with corporates, worked for large organizations. I was part of learning and development teams, and I am also a ITF certified coach. I have coached several leaders, and I know how leaders think before promoting someone. So I'm looking forward to see you in my webinar. Thank you.